Everyone, Joe Gonzalez here, and uh, it's Veterans Day. And first of all, I just want to thank all of the veterans out there, all of the families who have sacrificed, um, all of the vets who have served, and to help preserve this great country. And I guess it is appropriate that this happens today, that I decided to come out with a State of the Union address in my own words, call it. And I'll start out by saying, in case you missed it, the second the second American Revolution has already happened. Okay, and I'm going to go through and kind of give a timeline on things and give kind of a macroeconomic view of our union over the last couple hundred years. I'm not sure how long this will take, probably about 20 to 30 minutes. I do have notes. I'm sure I'll make mistakes, but I think this is important for people to understand what is actually happening in our country, to understand how to prepare and what's going to happen and what's coming up for the next several years. First of all, we have to understand that everything happens in cycles. They happen in 20-year cycles, they happen in 10-year cycles, they happen in 80-year cycles. We are in the midst of a major time frame cycle, and a monetary cycle, and this is all based on the structure of the our world economy as well as our internal structures. And so I want to give you a view of what's happening right now, again, to help you prepare. And first of all, if I had a United States flag right now, it would be displayed in a distressed position. And I'm very serious about that. And as I said, the Second American Revolution has basically already happened. So let's go back in history to review a little bit and see the big picture so you can see what is happening now and put this all into context. So first of all, 1776, our first American Revolution, when we declared our independence from the King of England and an overreaching government back then. And we had the 13 colonies that banded together as 13 independent states, and we formed the Republic, and we declared our independence from England. And remember what those words actually were in the Declaration of Independence. And the preamble was, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." So that is the very basis of our country. Was not under a dictatorship, but it was based on individual rights and the pursuit of life, liberty, and happiness as individuals. And then we had these individual states. Okay? And then in 1787, I believe it was, that's when we actually signed the Constitution, which memorialized our republic and our structure of our government and how to keep the federal government at bay. It was designed to preserve the states' rights and designed to preserve individual rights. That's how our Constitution was set up. Everything was set up to be about the individuals and no power, the least amount of power through the federal government. And remember, the Bill of Rights was set up for the individuals to make sure we always preserved our freedom of speech, our privacy, our freedom of religion, our right to bear arms, our right to own private property, our right to due process. All of these things were for us as individuals designed in the Constitution. And it was a capitalist society. A capitalist society means we had a right to own private property. We had a right to our profits. We had a right to pursue what we wanted without government interference and involvement. It was laissez-faire, which means without government interference. And on the other hand, if you look at extremes, if that is right, individual rights and right to private property and capitalism, on the left is communism. It's the state ownership, the belief that individuals don't have the ability to do these things, so the state has to control everything and control the people. So you got to look at that as right and left, okay? And it's a line, okay? It's an extremism of how we're governed and how we're moderated, okay? And so then if you look at what happened, let's fast forward to the 1860s. We had certain things happening, including southern states having slavery, that sort of thing. And of course, people wanted to run slavery or end slavery. But a very important thing that happened in this event was basically one of the first big acts of federal consolidation of power to say we can't have it anywhere. States, you don't have the rights to do that. Okay, so that's something that people don't often talk about. Is that was one of our first acts of federal power grab was the Civil War. Okay, not that ending slavery was not a bad thing, of course. Of course, it was a good thing. But look at what happened. It was more of a consolidation. And then we went through decades of prosperity, actually, after the 1860s. And then something very important happened in 1913. The Federal Reserve Act was put in place. And what this meant was that the states could no longer print their own money, and the government couldn't print their own money, which the Constitution gave basically, I'm shortening it, but the federal power was granted for the government to print money based on gold and silver. Okay, and that was the only constitutional money. But the 1913 Federal Reserve Act, what it did was, because banks were doing up and downs and you didn't have as much control, people had to actually look at banks and make better investments and have self-control. What happened was that the J.P. Morgan decided he was going to lead a group of people together, lead J.P. Morgan, and they were going to help out the federal government, and say, we know a way to solve this, so we're going to create the Federal Reserve Act of 1913, which what that did was it privatized our bank and our money system, and the government was no longer printing money. And what happened was the Federal Reserve was set up. The Federal Reserve is not a federal agency. It is privately owned by a number of very, very wealthy individuals and private member banks, okay? And so what that did was give a certain group of bankers the power to actually create our money, okay? And the government didn't have the power anymore to print money for what the governmental needs were. It actually, as our society grew and what was the appropriate level, it actually made that the government could only borrow money anytime it needed it in the form of Federal Reserve notes. This is a liability. It is a Federal Reserve note. That means it is a liability of the Federal Reserve. What's it backed by? Nothing. It's not backed by anything except for us. It used to be backed by gold. This is a gold coin right here. And the money, the currency, as I'll call it, because gold is money. This is currency to transact. And it used to the currency used to be backed by gold. Well, that put a throttle on what things, on what the government could do and how much it could spend, because it had to be backed by this gold. Okay, so anytime the government needed to get money or to grow, it had to actually borrow it. So when you look at like what happened with the World War I, you have to borrow money to get into wars, and then World War II, you have to borrow more money to get into wars. And what happened was that, I'm skipping a little bit of details, of course, to get through this, but basically, after the World War One, then we entered into a period of where we had another power grab because the Federal Reserve, not only, that's when they also instituted in 1913 the IRS, okay, and taxation of individuals, which didn't happen before that, by the way. So that's another form of robbery. But after World War One, and then a few years later, when you actually, as I talked about, they were trying to prevent ups and downs of the economy. Well, guess what? What that monetary control by the central bank does is it actually gives the central bank control of our economy. And what they did was they basically created the stock market crash of 1929 and the Great Depression, the start of the Great Depression. And when everybody, that is another consolidation of wealth and power into the federal government and into the big banks. And what happened then was, as the market melted down and everybody cowered and everybody is, down and out, then FDR says, okay, let's move this needle of individuals over to another power grab, and let's start creating a welfare system, a social welfare system. So they created the Jobs Act in order to create internal spending, because now they could start spending more money, because now they could just borrow to get money from the Federal Reserve. So the Federal Reserve loves it because the private bankers loves it when the government borrows money from them and pays them interest, right? So they actually created all these infrastructure jobs, and then created Social Security. What is that? What do both of those things do? They actually create more government jobs, a bigger government, more government dependence. Okay, we're moving further away from our independence capitalist society, our own retirement systems, and now we're moving into an industrial society with employees, and then they got to give them a retirement system, then they got to give them a social security system, and they're all working for the government in the 1930s for infrastructure through FDR, and it just creates more and more a bigger and bigger government. Well, then in the meantime, over across the ponds, we have another war going on, and it is World War II is getting going, and America at that point was one of the wealthiest countries, and America decided they were out of the World War II, but England and others needed to borrow money from the U.S. So what did the U.S. do? We took gold, and then we used our infrastructure and our plants and our manufacturing, because we had boomed through industrial age, to create things for the war. And we then took everybody else's gold, and we held that gold in our reserves. Okay, so that after the war, and after we entered the war, and then we were victorious, then now the United States has all the gold. Okay, and it still has the ability to print money, but it was just for the U.S. at that point. At that point, world trade wasn't a big thing, okay, at that point yet, okay? But over in, across the pond, they had communism going on since the early whatever ages. It's been communism and dictatorships have been going on. So they were in their cycle of going through communist rulers, okay, or fascist rulers. And so then when the U.S. had control of the gold, they said to the world, guess what? We can be your World Bank. We can provide the world currency because we have all the gold. So it'll be backed by gold. And all the countries, some of them reluctantly, said, okay, we'll peg. So they decided to peg the currency to the U.S. dollar. So they didn't have to worry so much about what their currency was. It was pegged to the dollar, the U.S. dollar, and they didn't have to worry if they were backed by gold or not, because they knew the U.S. dollar was backed by gold. Okay? So now what this means is this, and I'm going to bring you up to where we are, so hang with me. This is important that they don't teach you. Okay? This is important things that they don't teach you. The U.S. then had the ability to print all the money they wanted, because they were the world reserve currency, and they could just borrow what they needed. Now, it was governed somewhat by gold at about 40% backing at that time, I believe, in the 1940s and 50s and 60s. And then they started doing world trade, because now you could make trade easier by pegging things to a dollar. Okay, now this is where Dwight Eisenhower warned about after the wars and giving the U.S. the power to do this. And we had this infrastructure and these war machines, and he warned about the military-industrial complex. The military-industrial complex basically becomes the deep state. It's fueled by bankers, fueled by defense, everything in order to keep the U.S. as a world power. Okay, and what that gives us the ability to do is go anywhere in order to set up a system. Now, who wants us to set up the system? The corporations that are on the rise, the Ford, General Motors, all these corporations who are on the rise and now want to start growing and looking outside of the U.S. borders. So in the 1950s and 1960s, now you see the Korean War and the Vietnam War. And what's important about the Vietnam War is that what's going on here is in 1971, during the Vietnam War, actually, before the war ended, Nixon decided we no longer had to back these U.S. dollars because we had the military might anyway, so we could do whatever we wanted. And we no longer had to back the U.S. dollars with gold. So he did what's called close the gold window. What close the gold window means is you can no longer redeem your dollars for an ounce of gold or whatever the exchange rate was for gold. Okay? So that meant the U.S. dollar at that time, a Federal Reserve note, becomes an item that can be printed on an unlimited basis. Now, what that does here in the U.S. is it gives us the ability to live high on the hog. We all start borrowing like crazy from these banks. The banks actually have the ability to multiply this money because of fractional reserve system. So a $1 in deposit can become $10 in loans, by the way. And people start borrowing, okay? And the government then starts borrowing in order to fuel additional wars, in order to fuel our growth, in order to fuel the economy, and create the government bigger and bigger. But they can just borrow, and they're not printing, they're borrowing, okay? And they're borrowing from the private Federal Reserve. And the Federal Reserve is okay with that. And then trade is happening all over the world in U.S. dollars. So our dollars are getting out there, and the money supply is growing and growing and growing, which means our economy is growing and growing and growing, okay? But here's the issue. Whoever is closest to these dollars, I believe it's called the Cantillon effect. Whoever is closest to these dollars, the big banks, the Goldman Sachs of the world, whenever these get actually printed and distributed to the banks, those are the people that are going to benefit the most, and then it trickles. Okay, so whoever's closest gets these. Now, the reason I say this is because, remember, we're going through a consolidation of power. You as individuals and U.S. Citizens are now borrowing, and you're going into debt to buy houses, to buy cars, to finance student education, etc. This is growing and growing. Okay, and the problem is, as something gets more and more of something, it's valued at less and less. Think of a diamond. There's fewer diamonds, so they're worth more. There's a little amount of gold, so it's rare, it's worth more. The smaller amount there is of something, the more it's worth. But when they print more and more of these, the less and less it's worth. So in the meantime, our purchasing power is going down. Okay, now let's bring you up to what's now happening is, again, keeping in mind that China is a communist country, and then now the U.S. has the ability and their banks to go and help other countries, and the opportunity for growth are now in other countries. Our military can clear anybody out. We want to, the Goldman Sachs of the world, the JP Morgans of the world, they want to work with big investors and establish presence and big corporations to establish presence in other countries. So what do? They start investing in China. Okay, that's in the 1970s, 1980s. They start investing in China. Now, here's something very important to remember. Joe Biden became a member of the U.S. Senate in 1972, I believe. Okay, Joe Biden then in 1972, over the years, he became involved with the Foreign Relations Committee, and his entire career was spent on foreign relations. And so Joe Biden is now answering to the Council on Foreign Relations. Who is the Council on Foreign Relations? That council is made up of big business leaders all over the world, because what they're doing is they're working to establish trade and establish market share. So it's big business leaders like Ford, GM, whoever else, 1970s, 1980s, 1990s, think about big companies, and they're working to establish their growth outside of the U.S. market. And the reason for the wars, to finance the wars, is so that the U.S. can go in there with these big companies and have cheap labor. What's that mean to big corporations? Is more profit, is cheap labor. The U.S. had an incredible standard of living because our production plants, our steel plants, our car plants, everything was just smoking through 1970s, 1980s, and people were living really well because we had that production. Well, what happened in the 1980s and 1990s then was they wanted to start investing, and again, it's all driven by the bankers and the big corporations. They wanted to start investing in these other countries. So what happens to our jobs? They create opportunities where you can move manufacturing plants elsewhere. Our steel jobs, our auto jobs, all started declining under Bush and Clinton in the 1990s because now you have NAFTA and other agreements, okay? Okay, so the point is this. Again, this is big corporations working with government to get what they want. This is you now being sucked out of the system and your dollars declining in value. So the wealth gap starts to go up because those who are closer to money earn more and get the money. And those who are just working on wages, the price of inflation, the price of houses, the price of everything, your healthcare, the price of, all these things start going up and up while your wages aren't growing because there's downward pressure on wages because they're bringing in immigration, right, to pay them less in the United States. And at the same time, they're outsourcing jobs. And what they're trying to do is these world big corporations are working for totalitarian rule where they don't care about borders. They don't care about the U.S. They're looking for profits and market share. So they are using the cheap labor in China and Mexico, depleting us of our standard of living to come down to their standard of living. Okay, so 1990, this was all outlined in the Agenda 21, where the UN said, hey, we want to balance the standard of living between countries, and our future is going to be one world and borderless. And that's where they started creating all these ideas. And this is where the big, it doesn't matter whether Republican or Democrats, this is where they were all taking us, okay? Because they're not working for you. They're not working for the Constitution. They're working for the big corporations for profits. And this is how they line their pockets, okay? So now, where does that take us to in terms of what happened, say, through the Bush and Clinton, as of course the growth of China and the depletion of our jobs and our standard of living, but the increase of the money supply and the debt. Our debt now our U.S. debt is just climbing because it's separated from the gold and there's no throttle on it anymore, okay? So then they see that America is still the one that has the highest standard of living, but they got to start putting the final nails in the coffin. So in 2001, what happened in 2001? 9/11. Oh, what was the result again of 9/11? The terrible deaths, the terrible things that happened. But just they got a chance to destroy your Constitution again with your invasion of privacy. Now they track us on everything, okay? Because the internet was growing, so now they can start tracking us on everything. And then, of course, they got to keep moving forward with fewer and fewer individual rights and more big corporation growth. And as big tech is now starting to come into the picture, they got to make room for them. And then let's fast forward to 2008, when we have Barack Obama come on the scene. And Barack Obama is the perfect person for this UN or this Agenda 21 agenda, to say that we want one world, we want a borderless society. And Barack Obama says we want change. We want change. We want to have everybody have equal outcomes. They want more equal outcomes. Our U.S. system was not based on equal outcomes. It was based on equal opportunity, which we continue to have. Now, was there some systemic things? Again, it's all about the money and where the consolidation, where they wanted the people to go, but it's all being driven by the banks and where they want the people to go. So we got to understand that communism is all based on deception. And so everything that's out there is propaganda, is deceiving us, when reality the money is what's moving people and moving things to where they want to go. Okay, so you got to see through these things. But Obama then decides to start creating these change agents, right? So he wants to go into these communities because his objective is equal outcome. Okay, and not equal opportunity. He is a socialist, so he's a community agitator. So he literally starts to go into these big cities and start putting things into place, okay, to put all these community agitators and things in place to make sure that this fire is ignited, okay, in these major metropolitan areas. And then what they also did was, of course, was the Affordable Care Act, which again gives people is another destruction of your constitutional rights, because we weren't meant to have individual health mandated health care, right? So that you're forcing the government is forcing us to do something with our health care, and that's not in the Constitution. Okay, so now consider that under Obama, our race relations started to get intensified. Yes, we went through things in the 1960s. Again, I can't go through everything today. But our race relations are now intensified because they're actually prodding it with the instigators and things, and calling everything a race card. Now, I have black friends, brown friends, and what I'm just asking you to understand is, I'm asking us all to look at this as proud individuals and understand who the real enemy is, okay? Because again, communism is about deception, and communism will always use a race card. It doesn't matter what country you are in, but you notice in China, etc., you don't have a diverse community, right? They're using the race card as deception, and they will use this at all times. And then what it does is it creates divisiveness amongst us, because that's what they want. They want to keep dividing us for deception, okay? Now, so these things happen in communities, and all of a sudden you have things like a police shooting, okay? A police shooting, and all of a sudden now you have a narrative of hands up, don't shoot. And now this growing group of community activists, of course, believe that they're being targeted, and they might rightfully believe that. Statistics don't actually show that a black person is any more likely to be killed unfairly by a white person or whatever. If you look at the FBI crime statistics, it doesn't hold out. I understand that the agenda, what they're doing in the narrative and the belief in the fact that there are more arrests and everything, but again, keep in mind who the enemy is here. And what I'm saying is they're trying to increase the narrative of making it more serious than it is. Statistically, it's not that big, but it gets blown up, okay? And so that's designed to fuel the fire even more, and again create more divisiveness, okay? So now we have that divisiveness going all the way through Obama, and of course this with the jobs gone now, with now it's 2008, 2016, Obama's done his share. Now it's the rise of populism, because populism means, hey, where are all of us? We're left out. Our jobs are gone to China. We no longer have manufacturing plants. Our student loan debt, the young people, the student loan debt, because of debts and the ability to make people borrow at very low costs, have gone up like crazy. That's actually inflating. Debt is inflation, okay? It's causing you to borrow more, which means the colleges can actually charge more, because interest rates, as they go down, they can actually charge more. Your house is not appreciating in value. In 1980, if you had to borrow at 14% to get a house, it was a $100,000 house. And now in the year 2020, your financing rate is 2.5% versus 14%. Your payment is still the same, except this is a $400,000 house and this is a $100,000 house. Did your house appreciate in value, or did your dollars depreciate because you're able to buy much more because the interest rates are lower? Okay, this is all manufactured. It's all manufactured because the wealth is being stolen from you through your decreased purchasing power. Okay, and that's why everybody gets upset, because they're so strapped. Your wages are not growing and your purchasing power is going down. But again, the people who are closest to everything, it's going to go up. Okay, now here's the thing. Remember what happened in 2008 under Bush and then Obama was we had this little thing called a financial crisis, right, where the banks actually collapse. Okay, that was a horrible time, and I was a banker then, but understand what happened was that was another purposely crashed system, and then they fooled everybody by bailing out the big banks. Okay, the banks got the bailouts, and the people lost their houses. That's a transfer of wealth. But what did it also do? If you look at who the banks are remaining today, the bigger banks that got this, J.P. Morgan, Citibank, Bank of America, all others, a couple of them they sacrificed, like Lehman Brothers and Wachovia and a couple. But guess who swallowed them up? These other banks. And now look how big J.P. Morgan is. And it was supposed to be too big to fail then. Now it's really too big to fail. The government they decided to borrow more money, inject more into the system to bail these things out. The bankers don't have any consequences, because it is in the companies, it was bailouts for the rich. If you and I ran our company into a ground, we go bankrupt and we go bye-bye and we lose all our shit. We lose our house, we lose our savings, we lose everything. We're bankrupt. But what happens is called socialism for the rich. They keep the profits private, okay, which is a great capitalist thing, of course, but they socialize the losses and they put the bailouts on all of us. There is what's called moral hazard. These banks have no incentive to change anything they're doing, because they're always going to get bailed out by the taxpayers, okay? Again, this is a system that is absolutely created. Now, keep in mind that here we are in 2008, 2011, going through that period. Now they got the bailouts. Now they can keep printing more and more money. Things get more and more expensive. But what is happening in the meantime? The wealth divide is growing so big, and that race relations that they stoked up, and the young people are suffering so badly that it's stewing the pot even more. Okay, it's stewing the pot even more. So now, as you have the rise of the race relations, and then the formation of like BLM, okay, or Antifa. Remember, these are people that are really angry because everything's opportunity they look at is elsewhere. College is too expensive, et cetera, right? Okay, now BLM gets even more underneath certain people's skin, right? Because they're angry, but BLM has come out and said, we're against Western values. We're against the family unit. We're against capitalism. Okay, we're against private property ownership. What does that all sound like? They're against Christian values. They're against families, the normal nuclear family. They're against capitalism. That is socialism. Okay, that is socialism. Antifa comes out and says they want to knock down the whole system. Well, the system of crony capitalism might be what they're talking about, but they actually think that it's going to be better under a different system. The reality is it's the banks and everything that has created this system, and the Federal Reserve that is the real enemy. Okay, but so what happens then? Now let's go to 2020. Again, the continuation of the second revolution is all this is deception. All this is deception. Everything is looking great. The market's looking great. Stock market's going up, but your purchasing power is going down. They come out. Okay, you didn't know this. Most people don't know this, but in 2019, like in November, December 2019, our banks went broke again. If you research the repo markets, the Federal Reserve had to put trillions of dollars of reserves into the banking system because they went broke again. So they couldn't lend to each other. Okay. And people don't know that, but our economy didn't crash. Now you have the rise of big tech and everything, so our stock market's going up, okay? But what then happened is they know there's problems happening. They know there's deep-rooted problems because they never fixed it from 2008. Because of that inflation, what should actually happen is deflation. You should pop these bubbles. Because what happens if houses are no longer $500,000? What happens if they're $200,000? It's now more affordable to people. What happens if college costs come down? It's now more affordable to people. What happens if corporations go bankrupt instead of getting bailed out? Now you're deflating the values of the stock market. Another company can take it over. When somebody else takes something over because the price came down and somebody operated incorrectly, that is what's called capitalism. But if they're actually going to bail out people and companies, what's happening is the prices keep rising, and it's a bailout. It's socializing the losses. It's a bailout of the big corporations and the rich, and that wealth gap is getting wider and wider and wider. Does that make sense? Okay, so here we are now in 2020 when everybody's just pissed off. Our dollar is totally destructed. 98% of our dollar has been destructed. So our purchasing power is down. Everything's extremely high. But you know what? Deception. The stock market looks great because it's all inflated. It's never been popped. The housing market has never been popped again. The interest rates keep coming down so that they can make sure that keep inflating prices. Okay? So now 2020 comes along and big tech has risen so big and they have all these things, and you start noticing in 2016, 2017, 2018 the rise of big tech, artificial intelligence. We're going to have fewer and fewer jobs. The jobs are going to be taken over, okay, by big tech. What are they going to do with all these people who aren't going to be able to have jobs? Now, all of a sudden, you start seeing things like censorship, more and more problems with censorship. Again, more of our rights taken away. Because you can't speak out now against BLM. You can't say, hey, all lives matter. It's got to be BLM, or you can't be a free-thinking black person because then you're going to be called an Uncle Tom. You know, all these things are so bad, and people are not allowed to have free thoughts, and they've created these things called hate speech and then censorship by big tech, and it's just getting worse and worse. Now, again, fast forward to 2020, where we are, and COVID happens in 2020. COVID happens, okay? After all the warnings that our system is broken, after everything, all the rights are taken away, now what do? They put us in lockdown. They put us in lockdown for something that it doesn't have, as we see, of course, it doesn't have a huge death rate. But here's the problem with it. All of the states put people in lockdown. Everybody tried to mask people up. Again, censorship. Again, telling everybody deception that if you all of a sudden breathe on somebody, or if you get breathed on, you're going to die. Basically, it's scaring people with this propaganda. But again, it's even more so. It's control. It's control of people and a reduction of your rights, because the government then shut down businesses. They decided small businesses are going to be, wiped out. Restaurants, bars, gyms, anything that individuals still own is basically wiped out. But guess who's open? The big grocery store, the Home Depots, the Walmarts, all these big international companies that are going to benefit. Amazon, all these things, Microsoft, Facebook, everything that's going to benefit from being online and can be international, it doesn't matter, they're all going to benefit. But communism is, again, taking away individual property rights and also having the government work with key individuals and key corporations, and they get bigger and bigger. Okay? Communism does not want individuals owning private property. It's a wealth grab. It is a power grab. Okay? And so now think about when we all get frustrated and we're tired of going through this stuff and we see the statistics start coming out, then they start releasing the riots. The riot starts happening with BLM and Antifa, and the looting and rioting and the protesting all turns into riots. But supposedly Democrats, allow this to happen. Well, isn't that strange? Why would you allow destruction to happen? Well, what it does is it keeps, quote, conservative people who don't want to get involved. Conservatives are worried about their jobs. Conservatives are worried about their paychecks. Conservatives are more happy with their 401k growing than losing their rights and freedoms. Okay? This is all deception, everybody. It's all deception. And so they scared everybody into stay inside. Then they pull off the coup and they start talking about mail-in voting and everything else. Okay? This is to put the final nails in the coffin. Because if people are going to stay in, which they've scared you to stay in, they've told you can't go out without a mask, they told you you're going to die if you don't wear a mask, they've told you you're going to lose your property, you're going to lose your business if you open your business. These are all communist tactics, deception. Okay? It is just ridiculous. Do you see how the revolution has already happened? Your entire Bill of Rights, your entire Constitution has been pummeled because now they're moving into just a few corporations owning everything. Big tech has censored you. You're not allowed to say anything. You can't gather. You can't go to church. You can't do this. You can't do this. And here we are taking it. We've just been taking it. While the people who said we're going to burn down the system, we are going to take over, we are going to do this. They've been doing it the entire time, and most of it has been by deception, but the ones who are in agreement with having totalitarianism, having more dependence on the government, having the ability to take more jobs, etc., those who say that they no longer want capitalism, they want equal rights or equal outcome, not equal opportunity, okay? These are the ones that are okay with everything that's happening, and meanwhile, we've just sat back and taken this. And so here we are now with censorship by big tech. They've taken over. It's an international thing that has happened. The plan is for totalitarian government. What you don't know is the the IMF, International Monetary Fund, has come out and said it's time for a new Bretton Woods agreement. Remember when I said the U.S. dollar was backed by gold in 1944, and it was 80 years about in these big cycles? Now the IMF has come out and said it's time for a new Bretton Woods agreement. What that means is they don't want the U.S. to be the center of the world anymore. They want to have a different world reserve currency or a differently structured world reserve currency. And who knows, it could, I think it could be backed by gold, I'll tell you that. It could be backed by some other things, I don't know. But if it's backed by fiat money, we're just doing the same thing again, right? And all they're doing is working with these big corporations, subsidizing these big corporations. That is socialism. And as communism has been in action in our country for decades, people like Joe Biden and the Clintons and others, and even Republicans, of course, have just given this on a silver platter to all these big corporations. This is why the big corporations absolutely love this. They don't care. They just want to control everything. The Federal Reserve, their job is to lend. They don't care. They're a private bank. They can put as many out these as they want, and all the risk is on us because we lose our purchasing power. We lose our standard of living. And you got to understand that the revolution has already happened. The revolution has already happened, and Donald Trump was brought in to get power back to the people, back to individuals, back to capitalist society. Now, does he do everything that I like? No, but how much, look how bad this is. How much can one person do in a short period of time? The whole government has been infiltrated by this communist agenda. It's an agenda that's set on deception, and these things move in cycles, and here we are, 1944 to 2020, 56, 20, that's 76 years. What did I say? Every 80 years. Every 80 years, a massive, massive change. And now we're looking like, okay, the U.S. is like this. Guess what's now happened? China is growing like crazy because the bankers invested over there. They're coming out of communism. We're going into communism. Communism is going from capitalism to communism is destruction. They are looking for destruction. Going from communism into capitalism is a second cycle. That's what happens after your rebirth. After everything goes to shit, it's gone. Now there's a rebirth, and now the profiteers, the bankers, and everybody who can invest go back into that. And that's why China is now rising up again. And you got to be prepared, everybody, because this has all been a big, big lie, big deception based on money and power and wealth. And J.P. Morgan is just indicted again on another criminal charge. They just got charged $920 million for manipulating the treasury markets, manipulating the gold and silver market, and they just got charged again with another. This is like their fifth or sixth felony criminal indictment. And they're still in existence. They should be gone. They should, the powers, Jamie Dimon should be in jail. Lots of bankers should be in jail. But the bankers control everything. And you got to understand, this is what they want. And this is why the big companies are not, the banks are big with the big companies. We have 0% interest rates. We're stuck. We can't raise interest rates because the stock market will crash, the bond market will crash, all of our pension funds will crash when interest rates are raised. The banks will crash. When the commercial real estate market, which has been emptied, the buildings have been emptied. Eventually, when they can't pay their debts anymore, there's going to be more bailouts of the banks because those are going to just go defunct. Right? They're now talking. The Federal Reserve, if you look up the Banking for All Act, the Federal Reserve is actually making individual accounts. That's the plan to get stimulus money to people individually, not through banks. Because again, when this gets pumped out to the companies and the bailouts, they're the ones that get bailed out, but it's not going to the people. But they're setting it up so that they can actually send it directly to people through, say, a Fed coin, a digitized coin. And now you're going to have inflation eventually will go up. It's not going to right away because it will on some things like houses, etc., and the stock market probably, and gold, of course, because the more money that gets printed, whether it's digital or whatever, the more money in the system, the worse this gets and the less valuable. So that means things like assets like gold, silver is going to be used, wind power is going up, solar power is going up, so silver is going to be used like crazy. Gold has to be held onto as resetting the system, so gold is going to go up like crazy in my estimation. Maybe Bitcoin goes up some. I don't know. I'm not an expert on Bitcoin. Houses might for a while in some places where people are leaving these things that are happening, these bad things are happening, and they're coming to places like Florida or Texas or smaller towns. But eventually, when they have to raise interest rates, that's all going to crash. Commercial real estate's going to crash because nobody's in the buildings. Everybody can work from home. This is, gang, to end it, this is communism. The revolution has already taken place. They've stolen it. They've stolen your wealth. They've stolen the future. They've stolen. Now they set it up to steal the election. We're on our last legs. It's going to take a prayer. It's going to take, hopefully, not a legal system that is, we can find people, judges that aren't going to throw these cases out, or eventually gets to the Supreme Court where they'll hold this up. But still, Donald Trump is our last choice. But the problem is the trend line is still destruction by the banks, destruction by the big corporations, subsidies of the wealthy, and moving into a socialist communist society pumped up with federal money directly to people in the form of stimulus checks, universal basic income, all of those things, a whole new monetary system coming with a great reset. When you do these things, like you rely on the government for more, they're going to take more of your rights. They're probably going to mandate more things on your medical freedoms, like the vaccine and everything else. Travel is going to be restricted. This is bad. And, I'm just asking y'all to pray that this is what it means to make America great again. I'll just say that. But it's not about Donald J. Trump. It's about us realizing the deception of all of us individuals and who is the real enemy. So, I hope that you prepare for what's coming. I have some ideas to help you prepare, like I said, food, water, gold, silver, understanding what's happening in the markets, being prepared to live and maintain your standard of living. That is important because if the stock market crashes, you still want to maintain your standard of living. Gold is going to be a hedge against that, and all kinds of things, but more things are definitely going to come up again. We're on an 80-year cycle. This is going to last for years, and God bless you all. I hope that we, the individuals, and the Constitution and America prevails. Sorry it's long, but I wanted to give more information and help people. All right? Thank you all.